Dr. Wray, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you come from? Because most people don't know a whole lot about physics and haven't followed publications and stuff. And most people's eyes just kind of roll back in their head when you bring up the subject of physics anyway.
Well, I sort of grew up in the field, really. My mother, when I was a small child, my mother and father divorced at an exceptionally early age. And my mother was dating, when I was a young child, the brother of a very, very famous mathematician and physicist by the name of Shoshichi Kobayashi from Japan. And so it was somewhat innate, somewhat inherent in my family. I was born into it. Insofar as my educational experiences, I was a Kincaid scholar with Jaworski, Fulbright, and of course GE Westinghouse and a few other scholarships at an early age. Later on, I found out that I was just a little bit too immature to be in academia, and so I withdrew for a few years and more or less found myself as soon as my so-called hormones stabilized later, and I developed a little bit of sanity, so to speak, in the post-pubescent days, and I began to set myself into study. I've always had a love of mathematics, a love of physics, and I've always wanted to study this. I've always had a very, very, very strong interest in languages, in the Word of God, where it came from, why it was beset so mysteriously upon us, and what were its hidden meanings, if there be any hidden meanings, and what was it trying to tell us? And of course, these questions I've never answered. Anyway, I attended university, as did most people, and I obtained a couple of doctorates, then on with the DSCs, the professoriates, and all that. Over the course of my study, I found myself I was dyslexic, and so I tried to avoid any course with an intensive amount of reading. As a result, I ended up with so many equivalents of minors and so many equivalents of majors that the equivalents of deans of academic affairs came after me with a pension because of the paperwork I was causing them. And they were quite angry with me because I had affected, in my fear of reading from dyslexia, I had affected vast interests that took me into economics and an expertise, in political science as an expertise, in chemistry as an expertise, in electrical and structural and civil engineering as an expertise. These are areas in which I've worked and earned a living when during the summer months when academic profit is not available, so to speak. And along the way, I pick up the Russell Medal, the Quine Medal, the Wittgenstein Award, and the Einstein-Bergman Medal, and these were given me really by God, because I don't know how I came up with the ideas to do this type of work, and I cannot take proper credit. So, and I even have the Homer Award in poetry. And how I got that one, I have no idea, but the title of my poem was Questions. And it apparently was sufficiently moving to get me that award, and that one was completely unexpected. I have never been rewarded when I have tried to edify myself. I have always been rewarded when, unexpectedly so, when I've tried to edify God. And so there is no room for me to take credit. And to give you one perfect example, I've been, since 1976, I've been on presidential advisory staff. And this is a voluntary, it's more or less an appointment that's not White House staff and proper. We're not the people who are in the situation rooms of the White House as we see on television in the spy movies. We're the citizens of various nations who've had certain ideas that seem to answer certain questions at a certain time when an answer was well needed. And so these individuals, if they provide consistently some answers, are given this I wouldn't call it a station, but a privilege. And it's nothing other than the privilege of any human being in the United States of America, and that is to submit something to a president as an idea, or to Congress as an idea. And of course, it may end up in the garbage, and probably shall. But nevertheless, it's a very moving moment, and it makes an individual take seriously his civic duty. He has once this is bestowed, it really moves one to respect his country. The reason why I say I cannot take credit for this, and let me go into the reason why, is because I went to school with the family of George Herbert Walker Bush, and I played in their yard as a young child, and all the way into my teen years. And so I knew the entire Bush family. I knew the Johnson family as well. For similar reasons, they attended our school. Their children did, rather, and which gives away my age. Knowing the ages of some of these presidents, I think you may know how old I really am. And so anyway, we were a very, very, very interesting group, because I was a poor kid in a rich neighborhood, an extremely rich school, which at that time required $30,000 of scholarship money in order to attend that school per quarter, really. And this was an incredible amount of money, considering that for $30,000, one could send a child to MIT, Princeton, Harvard, Yale for a 4-year period. Not just 1/4 a year, but a 4-year period, 16 times that. So this will give you an idea of the exclusiveness of this school, the amount of priority placed on education, the amount of torture to which we were subjected, and why I was actually dyslexic. That was a horrible fear for me. The reading of any kind were absolutely perilous experiences. And so having known the Bush family, I was not surprised when interim DCI, interim Director of Central Intelligence Agency, Director George Herbert Walker Bush, Senator George Herbert Walker Bush, nominated me for presidential advisory staff. Now, how could I take credit for that when I knew the family, and this was more or less a friendly gesture? And so my first task was to work on a few problems with a Soviet economist for President Gerald R. Ford, sadly, after the Watergate era. This was also about the time I began my really heavyweight work in physics with, and this again was God-given. This is something that was given by God, nothing I earned, because I began working with Evgeny Mikhailovich Lifshitz, one of the foremost physicists in history, and I mean that's the general consensus of the physical community. His father, Professor Lev Davidovich Landau, gave us supercooling, superconductivity. The liquid the Fermi condensates liquid hydrogen, the Bose condensates liquid helium, and on. And so we have an incredible dynasty of people. And I found out these individuals were very, 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 very approachable. They were very easy to talk to as long as one had two priorities: interest and respect. These were two very important priorities. And also, my father professors had been some of the top minds in history as well. This too was fortunate, because this too was orchestrated by God. Because let me explain something. To find one incredibly famous, historically famous mathematician at any university is, in and of itself, an act of God. Not an act of man, but an act of God. To go further, to find 7 at one university is something that I would have to call equally miraculous. And to actually to find myself in a position where I was able to express to these gentlemen actually not only my gratitude for their teaching, their research work, their accomplishments, but also a strict interest in and respect for not only them as human beings, but also their fields of research work. And many of them had crossed over into multiple areas of research work, and I mean many areas. And I was taught we cannot specialize. If you like ring theory, then you had best know commutative algebra, and if you know commutative algebra, algebraic geometry, and if you know algebraic geometry, you better know differential geometry, differential topology, algebraic topology, and the rest of the mathematics it takes, and the rest of mathematics. And if you know a little bit about structural physics, you better know about nuclear physics, and blah, blah, blah. And so it grew, and it mushroomed, and I had the fortunate task of being at a university where these gentlemen were present, and I was absolutely flabbergasted. I kept asking myself, what happened? What happened? Because roughly 1975, I began work with Lifshitz, and here we began. Well, first of all, let me tell you something humorous. I'm known as a guy who sort of screwed up Nightline for a year, the ABC news program Nightline, owing to the fact that results predicted by some very interesting mathematics, work that followed my work with Lifshitz, actually was verified by the Hubble telescope and other exploratory high-energy astrophysical probes. And for 1 year, every night we were seeing new pictures of stars and stellar formations. This was, of course, my work on alternate cosmologies, followed in 1977 when I had given a reasonable argument in a response to a paper written by Steven Weinberg that the speed of light must vary if his electroweak arguments are to hold. And an article he actually published in the renowned Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. He quoted a little bit of my the excerpts of my argument, the highlights, and with my permission, he quoted me in that particular argument. I went on to point out that implied the variability of Planck's constant, the universal gravitational constant, the neutron and proton and pion masses, and some of our more sacred constants. In 1983, there was a great deal of work that was seen all the way from 1998 to approximately 2008 on the Discovery, ABC, NBC, and PBS in documentary form. It's all been verified by the University of Tokyo, the University of Moscow, and NASA. And then, in a weird turn of events, I got into medicine as well and developed a field known as neurophysics. And neurophysics is exactly that. And that is an oddity unto itself. I'd always had an interest in biomathematics, but unfortunately neurophysics was something into which I had never before delved. And when I did, I found out something very unusual, that we have neither a left nor right hemisphere, that these two guys are interchanging roles constantly with a particular resonant frequency, particular or peculiar to each human being. And this in and of itself was rather strange, and I was beginning to wonder, what am I doing here? Why am I here? How did I get into this field of, and why did I call it neurophysics? It seemed natural, but I know now that really what was happening was I was listening to what God was telling me. It's the physics of neurological phenomena. Later on, and this is probably my most bizarre, I'm recorded. This is on record. I'm one of the guys, many people have heard of the Buckyball, the carbon-60, the geodetic carbon molecule, C60. And I'm one of the guys who found that baby and who helped find that baby. And I don't know how many people were in on the finding of that guy, but unfortunately I got sucked in. And the only reason I got sucked in is because I didn't know how to say no. And that was approximately 1989, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, here I am working in algebraic geometry, mathematical logic, set theory, relativistic quark nuclear physics, and buckyballs. And I'm going, wait a minute, this does not make sense. And by this time I had chaired divisions of academies of sciences, and I'm going, wait a minute, what lunatic put me in charge of a division of do these, after I was overcome by flattery, I returned to my senses, and I said, whoa, I signed on the dotted line that yes, I would, and I don't know one thing about chairing a department, let alone an entire division of academy. You've got to be kidding me. This cannot be happening. And I said, yes. And you talk about something that shall beget prayer. When a person does not know what he is to do next, especially when it involves human lives, trust me, that person shall be praying to God several times a second, a microsecond, a picosecond. I'll go you one further. If one could pray continuously, that would be done. Unfortunately, humans are finite. So by this time I had chaired not only in the U.S., but in nearly every other country, and I'm going, what in the world is wrong with these people? I have no qualifications to chair. I could see only my irresponsibility, my frivolity, how many times I had been disrespectful as a child or acted foolishly while in upper school or lower school as a youngster. I could not see myself as others saw me. And perhaps that is an appropriate way for us to behave. I don't know. I do know this much, that it brought me to a point in my life where after so many scientific accolades, I wanted to go back in all seriousness and say, wait a minute, there's a point in my youth where I had a great deal of respect for and love of God, I need to go back to that point. How can I get there, and what has all this meant? Because if it has brought me only this far for one reason, and that's recognition, then it is worth nothing. So I began looking for meaning in mathematics, in physics. What was God trying to tell me? And I went back and I began reading the Bible, and I began reconsidering the Word of God, this time in a way where I listened to what God was telling me, not where I tried to seek something magically from God, but where I tried to allow God to explain to me, as best I could understand, what He meant for me and for me alone. It had to be meaningful to me before I could be a meaningful person to others. And I believe that is the ultimate answer to any question.